"You shall have it from his own pen," said Horatio. "In my portfolio, I have preserved certain scraps of Bernard's that will best speak his character. Prose and poetry, descriptive and colloquial, Hudibrastic and pastoral, trifles in every costume of literary fancy, according with the peculiar humor of the author at the time of their inditing. From these you shall judge my eccentric friend better than by any commendation of mine. I shall merely preface these early offerings of his genius with a simple narrative of our schoolboy intimacy. I had been about 3 months at Eton, and had grown somewhat familiar with the characters of my associates and the peculiarities of their phraseology and pursuits, when our dame's party was increased by the arrival of Bernard Blackmantle. It is usual with the sons of old Etona, on the arrival of a fresh subject, to play off a number of schoolboy witticisms and practical jokes, which, though they may produce a little mortification in the first instance, tend in no small degree to display the qualifications of mind possessed by their new associate, and give him a familiarity with his companions and their customs, which otherwise would take more time, and subject the stranger to much greater inconvenience. Bernard underwent all the initiatory school ceremonies and humiliations with great coolness, but not without some display of that personal courage and true nobleness of mind, which advances the newcomer in the estimation of his schoolfellows. First impressions are almost always indelible. There was a frankness and sincerity in his manner, and an archness and vivacity in his countenance and conversation that imperceptibly attached me to the young stranger. We were soon the most inseparable cons, one, the depositors of each other's youthful secrets, and the mutual participators in every passing sport and pleasure. Naturally cheerful, Bernard became highly popular with our miniature world. There was, however, one subject which, whenever it was incautiously started by his companions, always excited a flood of tears, and for a time spread a gloomy abstraction over his mind. Bernard had from his very infancy been launched into the ocean of life without a knowledge of his admiral too, but not without experiencing all that a mother's fondness could supply. When others recapitulated the enjoyments of their paternal home, and painted with all the glow of youthful ardor the anticipated pleasures of the holidays, the tear would trickle down his crimsoned cheek, and quickly stealing away to some sequestered spot, his throbbing bosom was relieved by many a flood of woe. That some protecting spirit watched over his actions and directed his course, he was well assured, but as yet he had never been able to comprehend the mystery with which he was surrounded. His questions on this point to his mother, it was evident, gave her pain, and were always met by some evasive answer. He had been early taught to keep his own secret, but the prying curiosity of an Eton schoolboy was not easily satisfied, and too often rendered the task one of great pain and difficulty. On these occasions I would seek 1. Friends, 2. The Eton phrase for father, him out, and as the subject was one of too tender a nature for the tongue of friendship to dwell upon, endeavor to divert his thoughts by engaging him in some enlivening sport. His amiable manners and generous heart had endeared him to all, and in a short time his delicate feelings were respected, and the slightest allusion to ambiguity of birth cautiously avoided by all his associates, who, whatever might be their suspicions, thought his brilliant qualifications more than compensated for any want of ancestral distinction. The following portrait of my friend is from the pen of our elegant Con, Horace Eglantine. A portrait. A heart filled with friendship and love, a brain free from passion's excess, a mind a mean action above, a hand to relieve keen distress. Poverty smiled on his birth, and gave what all riches exceeds, wit, honesty, wisdom, and worth, a soul to effect noble needs. Legitimates bow at his shrine, unfettered he sprung into life, when vigor with love doth combine to free nature from priestcraft and strife. No ancient escutcheon he claimed, crimsoned with rapine and blood, he titles and baubles disdained, yet his pedigree traced from the flood. Ennobled by all that is bright in the wreath of terrestrial fame, genius, her pure ray of light, spreads a halo to circle his name. The mainspring of all his actions was a social disposition, which embraced a most comprehensive view of the duties of good fellowship. He was equally popular with all parties, by never declaring for any particular one. With the cricketers he was accounted a hard swipe 3, an active field 4, and a stout bowler, 5. In a water party he was a stroke 6 of the 10 oar. At football, in the playing fields, or a leap across Chave ditch, he was not thought small beer 7 of, and he has been known to have bagged 3 sparrows after a tutelate of 3 miles. His equals loved him for his social qualities, and courted his acquaintance as the sine qua non of society, and the younger members of the school looked up to him for protection and assistance. If power was abused by the upper boys, Bernard was appealed to as the mediator between the fagnine and his master. His grants of liberties 10, to the commonalty, were indiscriminate and profuse, while his influence was always exerted to obtain the same privileges for his numerous protégés from the more close aristocrats. 11. He was always to be seen attended by a shoal of dependents of every form in the school, some to get their lessons construed, and others to further claims to their respective stations in. 3. A good batman. 4. To run well, or keep a good lookout. 5. Strong and expert. 6. A first-rate waterman. 7. Not thought meanly of. Sometimes this phrase is used in derision, as he does not think small beer of himself. 8. A walk. 9. Any 6th or 5th form boy can fag an oppidan underling. The collegers are exempted from this custom. 10. The liberties, or college bounds, are marked by stones placed in different situations. Grants of liberties are licenses given by the head boys to the juniors to break bounds, or rather to accept them from the disagreeable necessity of shirking, i.e., hiding from fear of being reported to the masters. 11. To that interesting original miscellany, the Etonian, I am indebted for several valuable hints relative to early scenes. The characters are all drawn from observation, with here and there a slight deviation, or heightening touch, the rather to disguise and free them from aught of personal offense than any intentional departure from truth and nature. The next cricket match, or water expedition. The duck and green pea suppers at Surley Hall would have lost half their relish without the enlivening smiles and smart repartees of Bernard Blackmantle. The preparations for the glorious 4th of June were always submitted to his superior skill and direction. His fiat could decide the claims of the rival boats in their choice of jackets, hats, and favors, and the judicious arrangement of the fireworks was another proof of his taste. Let it not, however, be thought that his other avocations so entirely monopolized him as to preclude a due attention to study. Had it been so, his success with the wood never have been so complete. His desire to be able to confer obligations on his schoolfellows induced Bernard to husband carefully every hour which he spent at home. A decent scholarship and much general knowledge was the reward of this plan. The treasure house of his memory was well stored, and his reputation as an orator gave promise of future excellence. His classical attainments, if not florid, were liberal and free from pedantry. His proficiency in English literature was universally acknowledged, and his love of the poets amounted to enthusiasm. He was formed for all the bustle of variegated life, and his conversation was crystallized with the sparkling attractions of wit and humor. Subject to the weakness to which genius is ever liable, he was both eccentric and wayward, but he had the good sense to guard his failing from general observation. And although he often shot his arrows anonymously, he never dipped them in the gall of prejudice or ill nature. I have dwelt upon his character with pleasure, because there are very few who know him intimately. With a happy versatility of talents, he is neither lonesome in his solitude, nor overjoyous in a crowd. For his literary attainments, they must be judged of by their fruits. I cannot better conclude my attempt to describe his qualifications than by offering his first essay to your notice, a schoolboy tribute to friendship. True friendship. In fido scurri distabit amicus, Horace. How very seldom do we find a relish in the human mind for friendship pure and real, how few its approbation seek, how oft we count its censures weak, disguising what we feel. Adulation lives to please, truth dies the victim of disease forgotten by the world. The flattery of the fool delights the wise, rebuke our pride affrights, and virtue's banners furled. Wherefore do we censure fate, when she withholds the perfect state of friendship from our grasp, if we ourselves have not the power, the mind to enjoy the blessed hour, the fleeting treasure clasp? This, I have reason to believe his first poetical essay, was presented me on my birthday, when we had been about 2 years together at Eton. A short time afterwards, I surprised him one morning writing in his bedroom. My curiosity was not a little excited by the celerity with which I observed he endeavored to conceal his papers. "I must see what you are about, Bernard," said I. "Treason, Horatio," replied the young author. "Would you wish to be implicated, or become a confederate? If so, take the oath of secrecy and read." Judge of my surprise, when, on casting my eye over his lucubrations, I perceived he had been sketching the portraits of the group, with tilde 31 tilde tilde whom we were in daily association at our dames. As I perceive by a glance at his work that most of his early friends have parts assigned them in his colloquial scenes, I consider the preservation of this trifle important, as it will furnish a key to the characters. Eaton's sketches of character